Welcome to Bright Ideas Innovation Insights Monthly Hangout. We're very, very happy to have you here to hear from three experts on Corporate Innovation 101 and how we got started. So before we jump in and introduce the great panelists we have today, what I would like to do is just do a little bit of housekeeping. So first, know that we'd appreciate hearing your questions, and we will make sure we allow time at the end to answer them. So at the bottom, you should be able to see an area where you can take a couple polls, which we'd love your input, and ask any questions that you may have. What we'll do is we'll do about 45 minutes of interaction on questions, Q&A, and then we will leave the last 15 minutes to answer your questions. All right, so please do take time to fill those in. And then also do know that we have folks out there in social listening in for questions. You could submit them there or any other engagement you'd like to give. We're using hashtag innovation and hashtag leadership, and our handle is @BrightIdea. For anyone who's participated earlier, we used to have @BrightIdeaHQ. Our Twitter handle is @BrightIdea now, so we would love to hear from you. All right? And with that, I would very much love to welcome the panelists. So we have two that are returning, okay, because this is so much fun. So we have Hyun, who's Senior Director of Social Business Innovation, SAP Community Network. And at SAP, Hyun manages initiatives surrounding the community and bringing a social approach to how innovation innovates. His views today are from his experience, and I think you'll find them very, very valuable. And then we have, thank you, Hyun, very much for joining, and I know it's going to be a lively discussion.
Looking forward.
And then entering in, we have Aisha Tatiana, who is VP of Innovation and Design Thinking at LPL Financial, and that's the nation's largest independent broker-dealer. LPL has over 14,000 financial advisors and 700 financial institutions. Aisha is responsible for developing a new approach to making change at LPL using an enterprise-wide innovation strategy and tools. And we very much look forward to hearing what she has to say, and it's very interesting to see more titles coming out with design thinking. So thank you for joining us, Aisha.
My pleasure.
And then we have a new panelist, Courtney Wood, Director of Innovation Management Services at Tata Consultancy Services. Courtney Wood leads the Innovation Management Services capability for Tata Consultancy Services, an IT services consulting and business solutions organization, delivers real results to global businesses. And Courtney has 25 years in management consulting, supporting large and early stage startups, or enterprises, and producing meaningful outcomes by developing the right business strategies and capabilities to help companies transform and innovate so that you can be more competitive. And hopefully that's partly why some of the folks have joined today, is to hear how they can be more and more competitive leveraging innovation and innovation programs. So to get to know folks a little bit, Courtney, I have you up here first, so I'll have you first introduce yourself, and I'd like each panelist to add one fact that no one can Google about you. And what we do here is have this shared so that the folks listening in can feel they get to know you a little bit more before we jump into the questions. So Courtney.
All right then. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Gretchen, for having me today. It's a real pleasure. So I guess maybe the fun fact that most people couldn't Google is that in the early 2000s, I thought that I would try to get into TV commercials. I was in theater and when I was in high school and college, so I thought it might be fun to take commercial acting classes and voiceover classes and try to break into the TV commercial scene. I actually did do a couple, very small scale, but then I left my career that behind and really started focusing more fully on my day-to-day job. It was a fun distraction for a while, but got back to real business.
I bet that was fun. Well, welcome and thanks for taking time for us.
Sure.
So, and Aisha, what secrets do we have about you?
I'm noticing a trend that everything I share on our Bright Ideas webinars are things that make me look really nerdy. I'm realizing now as I'm saying the second one in a row here. My fact you couldn't probably find by Googling me unless you're on my Facebook page would be that myself and my family are avid RVers. We love to take the RV out with the kids and leave behind the electronic devices and do all the corny things you see on those RVing commercials, like look at stars and stuff. So it's full on geek fest when it happens. It's pretty great.
Aisha and I were talking about it. Now she's got me motivated to rent an RV. So you never know what's going to happen with these Hangouts. Ewan.
Hey, and yeah, thanks for having me a second time. I guess that's a good thing that you called me back. It's funny you say expert, because I definitely have to lead with the fact that this career does not make me feel like an expert. And I think if you do ever feel like you know it all, you don't understand what the problem is, because I learned so much in innovation management. Secret. So last time I gave something, I'll give something new. I used to have. Now I'm getting older, it's kind of faded, but I used to be able to predict elevators to 100% certain. So I could just walk in somewhere and I push the button and I'd say it's going to be that one. And like sure enough, it would ding. Like for years, like this is like 10, 20 years, like it just continues constantly. And this literally, at one point in time, I even started to question this, because I was with a friend, we've been drinking, I was like bragging about this thing, and I pushed the elevator, and you know when the light goes on? Like a light goes on for the elevator, a different one went on. So I was like, oh, I totally failed. And then that elevator never came. The one I said actually opened. So.
Wow, so we have a psychic, a TV personality, and an RVer. This is quite the innovation team we have to talk with. All right, that's amazing.
It's a reality show in the making. That's
All right, Ewan, we have you up, so I'm going to ask you the first question. Okay. Can you talk a little bit and briefly describe the state of your innovation program today?
Yeah, our state innovation program today. So we've been running for about 5 years. We have, our team, we started out was much like an experiment. We tried to figure out where there was opportunity within the organization, and we started off with product enhancement type. And since then, we've kind of grown to be a full service vendor, and we provide actually like a consulting service, but internally, and a platform. So that's kind of where we are today. So we offer everything from outside campaigns, crowdsourcing, working with students. We offer internal, working with employees, VC style or crowd challenging ones, just a whole spectrum. We're really kind of experimenting within the organization and also within ourselves, just seeing what works and what takes and what's offering the most value.
Great. So just along those lines, before implementing your innovation program, had your organization taken any steps towards innovating before you actually got the program off the ground? And if so, can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so I work for SAP. We're one of the biggest software companies on the planet. So in the R&D side, absolutely. We've done so much innovation in there. They've worked with students and universities. They work with customers, so they bring them in, do co-innovation with partners and that sort of thing. And we have dedicated teams there. We also did a whole design thinking rollout, so rolled it out to our 70,000 employees. But what we found is that the effectiveness. So it's actually interesting, because I was on another Bright Idea call recently, and it was interesting. Someone said that they found the product stuff was quite incremental in the way a lot of it targeted. And design thinking, we'd find there'd be a lot of good practices, but maybe not as well as going after real innovative opportunities. So what we found is there's still a lot of opportunities outside of engineering. So especially like in marketing and sales, those areas are just like untapped. Nobody seems to think that finance is a place you should go to get innovative ideas. So those are some of the historic things, and also looking forward, a lot of the opportunity spaces that I see.
Okay, no, great.
Could I ask a question? Do you find that any of the different, let's say, techniques or tools that you use are better suited to different kinds of innovation? So if you want breakthrough, you maybe stick to design thinking, and if it's the incremental, it's, if you will, the crowdsourcing. Any perspective on that?
We've stuck to kind of using the online crowdsourcing platform. So if it doesn't quite fit into that, we've kind of just not gone after those. So we've kind of self-selected. But what's interesting is you asked that, because this recent one, we did a kind of a VC style, and we actually asked the managers in each of the regions to hold physical 90-minute sessions, design thinking sessions, just to come up with ideas. Yeah. And the goal of that was actually more to get communicate and get people engaged with coming up with ideas, and that stimulated tons. We were targeting 15, we got 60 ideas out of this campaign. Yeah. So the devil's in the details with innovation management. I find the process is this, but there's little things like that. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, interesting. So Courtney, interested, again, you come from a little different perspective, right? Consultancy services, so you've worked with a lot of different companies. So love to hear a little more in terms of before implementing your clients, before the clients implemented the programs, really what did those look like and how did they get where they are?
Well, the fact of the matter is, organizations since the beginning of time have been innovating, right? It's just that now with that we're in the digital, the exponential age, the pace of change is requiring us to generate, if you will, these new and novel ideas for products and services or business models or business processes, customer experiences. We're having to develop these unique ideas more often, more quickly in order to adapt to the changes around us. So the fact of the matter is organizations have always been innovating, but their innovations had a longer tail to them. You could invent something and ride that rail, put that train on those tracks and ride that rail for decades. But now an organization needs to generate, if you will, a continuous pipeline of what Professor McGrath would say, a continuous pipeline of advantages. So I think now, and we're very comfortable. All of our clients, I think, are pretty comfortable if you're familiar with the paradigm like run the business and change the business. Organizations, in terms of, are very good typically at kind of the incremental innovation in the run the business and optimizing, coming up with more efficient and effective ways to deliver experiences or services and so on. So where where they think that there's an opportunity to do something different is really more when you're getting into this adjacency and this breakthrough type of innovation. And so they're scratching their head and thinking about, is there something new and different that we need to be doing there? And so, that's when they're usually turn to us and say, help us get outside of our own box. I think we've got the incremental nailed. Or they said, we've been like a lot of organizations that they invest a lot in the front end of innovation, on the ideation as opposed to the back end. So they may very well have lots of ideas, but then nothing happens with them. And I think probably Kuan and Aisha can speak to this. If nothing happens to those ideas, nothing can kill the momentum that's developed or start generated in the ideation. And so we're usually coming in to help them more on sort of the adjacency breakthrough idea generation and conversion, as well as we're spending a lot of time these days talking to clients about how do they implement something on the back end, something that we would call rapid iterative experimentation, which we can talk about later. But so yes is the answer, but we see certain areas that draw more attention from us or help for us than in others.
Okay, great. Aisha, what about you? What did your program look like before?
So I've been here at LPL for about a year. That's about as long as they've had a formal program, and they spend about 18 months with IDEO as a consulting group, rolling out some products and services to kind of get their appetite wet for design thinking. So to kind of piggyback a little bit on what the team is saying in general, when we're starting new practices like this, almost always the word innovation equals ideation to folks who aren't really sure how innovation works. So when they're asking you for an innovation practice, what they're really asking you for is a pipeline of ideas, and that's usually because of the faulty assumption that the reason you're not innovating is because these darn people, they don't have good ideas. And almost always that's not the case. Almost always people innovate or ideate usually just fine. The pipeline between how what inspires them to ideate and how they actually get that work done, that's usually what's broken. So it was interesting, the good news for LPL is that they spent time with a consultant who were process purists, so they really got to see what everything looks and feels like in its most robust, this is the way you're supposed to do it, quote unquote mode. So they kind of got a full tour of how design thinking works. And then the bad news, though, of course, is that is almost an antiseptic environment. It's because there's such willingness to comply to some consultants who, quite frankly, were not inexpensive. So because they were so willing to comply, they didn't really mentally invest in the process. Like, they didn't really explore it in such a way to say, oh, this is the part I'd like to own, and this is the part I fundamentally reject. So we've been kind of spending the last year understanding, what the organization can adopt and not adopt, and for the things that they can adopt, adjusting and figuring out why they feel like they can't adopt them, and perhaps developing alternative strategies to make it a little bit more comfortable to, do things differently than they've been doing it so far.
Okay, no, great. It's It's always interesting to hear where people started and where they're going. So a couple things, just I see a lot more folks have joined, so let me just go ahead and do a quick reminder. This is Corporate Innovation 101, how we got started. I'm Gretchen Hoffman, Vice President of Marketing at Bright Idea, and we are monitoring the social channels. Our handle on Twitter is @BrightIdea. If you'd like to submit any questions, you're more than welcome, or make any comments. We're using #innovation, #leadership. And today we're very fortunate to have Aisha from LPL Financial, Kewan, who is here from SAP, and we have Courtney, who is here from Tata Consultancy Services. So again, thank you for joining, and please do feel free to submit your questions at the bottom of the screen. Fill out the polls, which are there too, or feel free to engage with us in social. Okay, and with that, we'll go ahead and continue. And let's see, I'd love to ask Kewan a question here. So what was the defining moment that you knew you needed a program, and moving forward, like what changed? What was the impetus to make you say yes?
So we're totally grassroots. I mean, I hear so many stories of these executive support top-down programs. We started off in the community. We had the SAP Community Network had a member of about 2 million members, and we just had forums and blogs and a lot of activity and special interest groups, stuff like that. And the one thing we didn't have though is we had actually it was interesting because SAP is more kind of big system stuff in the back end, but they've acquired a bunch of consumer companies, and SAP didn't have an infrastructure for engaging with consumers, a way to engage with people, and didn't have a way to engage in the community. And so we had a lot of forums that were supposed to be kind of question and answers that had ideas in them, but the product managers couldn't get through them. So we created Idea Place out of that to provide a place for customers to start sharing ideas and feedback to the organization and effectively get through the 4 walls that surrounded our organization a lot better and scale. So that was kind of the first moment, and that got us started. We got a lot of buy-in. We got through all our legal and data privacy issues with that. And then I think the second biggest one is when we realized, even though we have so much, as I mentioned earlier, R&D and design thinking, all these best practices, that the implementation of that and the implementation of innovation outside of engineering is all over the place. And I love some of the comments in the sense of just like ideation does not equal innovation, or at least people thought those two equal the same. And we had problems where it was like we had an innovation program, and they had a couple €100,000 to give to innovation ideas, and they just couldn't get any ideas. They just couldn't give the money away. It's just like it's just and we came in and we helped them, and we just put the whole front end on, and now we have like way too many ideas for the money, right? We could spend millions upon millions of dollars now just in one campaign, and so that perfect example of just a team that needed help, and what a well-structured program could do. So it's kind of those two. Seeing that, the beginning got us started, and the second is really starting to reflect on ourselves and identify where the opportunities were in the business.
Well, your comment earlier of you weren't sure what an expert you are. You clearly are. I know the program you have up and running is very sophisticated, and good for you. Good for SAP.
Try.
Yeah.
Try.
And Courtney, just from the perspective of the different clients that you have, what were some of their defining moments that had them say, yes, I want to invest in an innovation program?
Yeah, I think sort of the obvious one is that, and you've all probably read the studies and talked to just within your organization, I think there's no executive on the planet that hasn't acknowledged that, innovation is absolutely essential to their longevity. I think that they're seeing the statistics that say that, 40% of the companies that were around in 2000 were no longer around in 2010, and the Washington State University last year published a study that said another 40% of the S&P 500 will not be here in 10 years. So they recognize that, if you will, the lines of business that are maybe the cash cows, that the profit-generating engines of today are under threat. And so, the fun fact for me that I love is that, in 2000, if you were going to start an internet-based company, it took you $5 million to get it off the ground. Well, today, with the democratization of technology and knowledge and so forth, it's $5,000. So I think every executive, what gets them, some of them started, is going, I don't want to be, put out by the next Airbnb. Some, smart, inventive person with $5,000 and a dream who can just disrupt my core business. I mean, they're talking now about, you know, shuttering the banking industry. But I think some of the I think what maybe forward-thinking clients that, you know, that have come to us, they're the ones that say, hey, listen, you know, we have a changing, I mean, the millennials, you know, right now, something like, I don't know, something less than 10% of the millennials work for large corporations today. But by 2025, they're going to count for 75% of the population and of the workforce. And, you know, innovation is about, it's really, it's about the combination of what I like to say dots. Actually, I learned that from a partner of ours, Ron Jonash. You know, it's a creative combination of dots, and those dots of information and data. And that requires diversity, diverse perspectives, diverse thinking. And you particularly, I think, need thought-leading or leading thinking organizations recognize that you need to have, you know, sort of these digital natives that for which all of this is second nature, a part of the business. And they have a very different value system than certainly my generation. You know, they look for organizations that have a higher purpose. They look for opportunities that create opportunities for autonomy and creativity. And so they recognize that innovation management could very well be what a management innovation. It is a new way to structure, you know, your organization to generate the kinds of ideas that is going to sustain the enterprise for a long time. So those are some of the reasons. I think the one is the obvious. It's just, you know, the fact that they could be disrupted. But the other, I think, is using innovation and let's say a systematic approach by which you innovate as a way to draw in and retain and grow your future leaders of your enterprise.
I got a quick question actually for you, Courtney. So how many companies, or I mean, what's the percentage that you see them actually start to incorporate innovation as part of the core part, and not just like a design thinking program or a couple one-off, like say 10% of our spend or our program focus is on innovation, like an X percentage or something, as opposed to just a trial.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say that, you know, the majority of our clients have dipped their toes in one or two areas. I mean, if they'd had it all figured out, they probably wouldn't be knocking on our doors. So, you know, it's not uncommon for institutions to have started, let's say, the collaborative innovation programs like you've done at SAP so well, Kewen. Certainly design thinking is something that's starting. You know, having sort of this skunk works or this separated group. I mean, I'm mindful of, you know, not a client of ours, but a company I was really inspired by them, the Quicken Loans and their cheese factory, and having a separate unit, you know, filled with what I might consider, I mean, if I were building one of those groups, I would try to, you know, identify the natural entrepreneurs inside of our corporation and nurture them to be this cell, if you will, that is focused on sort of the big problems. So, you know, there's no one company, or the vast majority of our clients are not, you know, trying multiple, you know, channels, if you will. They've started with one and then they're expanding out from there.
Gotcha.
I mean, is that consistent with when you speak with your colleagues, in other industries, in other companies?
Yeah, it's all over the place too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish it was a lot more. I mean, I see stats like Coca-Cola, and it's like 70% keeps the lights on, 20% for new products, 10% for innovation. And I've never seen, I don't think I've seen any other company say something so bold as where they spend their money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're hoping it's going to go up to 50% soon. We all wish it.
Revenue. No, I was kidding.
Aisha, just along those same lines, could you just talk a little bit about, you know, as your company got started with innovation, what did the team look like, and how did it evolve in the first year? I know you've only been there a year, so.
I think, you know, when I was thinking about this question earlier, I think I've seen a bunch of different things situationally, a bunch of different organization designs, a bunch of different practice designs, depending on who I've worked with. And what I think all of those things have in common is that, you know, understanding the difference between starting something from scratch and supporting something in a production environment. So, you know, when you're starting an innovation practice, which is usually when I as a resource am involved, particularly that's the activity I do starting these practices. I think even before you get inside of the discipline of innovation, there is this basic thing that says the people who design things and build them from the bottoms up are not usually the same type of personality as the folks who run them once they are started. So I think particularly what you're looking for is you're looking for someone who is creative and is comfortable with disruption, but is also, unlike a lot of folks who are creative and comfortable disrupting things, also knows how to manage that disruption to an end. So can kind of take the emotional energy that's generated by that disruption and turn it into something positive. And so if you can get someone who's really good at that, or I don't think you need very many of them, quite frankly. I think, you know, here at LPL we have about 3,000 people, and we have 2.5 people dedicated to innovation. At Travelers, a little bit of a larger group, but all in all, you know, less than 5 people who are working on this actively. So I think if you've got just a few of those folks who can kind of rile up the energy of disruption and then use it constructively and use that to the end of, you know, designing a process that the folks that are maybe are not as good as that can tap into to help them move through the discomfort of disrupting the status quo. I think you get away with very few resources doing something that feels very big to the people that it's happening to.
That's a great point. I like the line, rile up the energy for disruption. You can make a big impact, just a few people. So,
that's right.
It's a great point.
You need instigators and mavericks, quite frankly. You need people who understand that a maverick is a role, and it's not just a personality trait, but it's actually a way people interact with each other, and they can use that good energy to kind of, or energy period, and turn it into something good and positive.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. You've definitely described some of the right traits for folks. Courtney, what would you say are some of the right traits, desirable or undesirable, for members of an innovation team that you've seen from your clients have been, you know, working or not working?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I like to think that, I mean, hopefully, I would argue that the enterprise should view, if you will, its entire ecosystem, not just employees, but even extending beyond the 4 walls, whether into supply chain partners, or if they do have an active open innovation network, or even competitors, let's say, in their economic ecosystem. But that they view this ecosystem as ultimately is the innovation team. So that's and so if you were to describe, if you will, sort of the attributes of an ecosystem or of a community that is, you know, innovative, I think first and foremost, one of the core attributes, key attributes, is really having an affinity and alignment with the customer. And that's why I think this design thinking is taking off. The recognition that we have to put the customer at the center, be empathetic. What are the real problems that we're solving, or the jobs that they need done that we can do bigger, bolder, faster, cheaper with innovation? So from a sort of an ecosystem or a community perspective, I think certainly having customer empathy. I think there's also, you know, having a real pride in the products and the services and the experiences that the customer delivers. And then I think they also have to be, you know, in a position, they have to be in the know. I mean, this gets back to the leadership and maybe the core innovation team, which you want me to speak to. But they need to understand what is the innovation strategy, and that they have a role to contribute. You know, I think from a leadership perspective, if you know, the innovation team ultimately gets their mandate from some senior executive, I think the attributes that you want to see in your senior executives is that they appreciate that the assets of the firm are not to be protected, but to be leveraged to sustain the enterprise for the long term. I think also, my computer just went to sleep, sorry. They recognize that you know, innovation is not just a side activity. That actually, and it doesn't just deserve the resources that really maybe aren't, you know, being fully utilized. It takes the best resources, it takes time, and it takes effort to do it right. Particularly, I think, when you're going to be trying to move into that adjacency or the breakthrough type of innovation where you might want to be disrupting yourself before someone else does. But I think, you know, I'm going to echo what Aisha said. You know, when you get down to the innovation center of excellence, or this shared service that is leveraged across the enterprise, I mean, I think you do want these folks, and the maverick I might describe as someone that, you know, is an opportunist, someone who sees that the glass is half full, that doesn't see the woe is coming, the sky is falling, but can turn that into an opportunity and can find excitement and be able to build that bring other people onto that. I would say that despite what most people think, most successful innovators, and we often think of our entrepreneurs, are not, just these sort of dumb luck geniuses that figured it out. It's actually, they have training, they have experience in this field. So I think you want to look for folks that have done things that, design thinking, that have been in new venture development, that have experience in lean innovation or lean agile development, particularly when you're thinking about the conversion or the back end of the innovation life cycle, not just ideation, but then converting those ideas to value. So I think you need to have people that have experience in this space. Certainly adds a lot of value. And I will not take anything away from the notion of just being persistent. And I 5 years ago, when I was taking to my leadership the thought that we should really scale a capability to help our clients master the discipline of innovation. I feel like I was an internal, entrepreneur. It requires persistence and dedication and remaining optimistic and really community building and evangelizing. And then last but not least, I think you have to have a good measure of prudence. You have to recognize that it's not putting everything at risk, but working within the confines, pushing the boundaries, but recognizing, that there are real constraints and trying to work around them. So those are some of the things I think at sort of multiple levels: leadership, the core innovation team, and then ultimately the innovation ecosystem.
Well, it's an interesting comment, Courtney, about, that you feel like you're an entrepreneur having to get this rolling. You have to be very passionate about innovation. I think, to your point, the pride aspect, people need to feel it and see it, so that they want to get on the bandwagon, right, on the bus. So definitely hear that from many of our customers, which is good to hear. Q, I'm going to jump over now to talk about C-level sponsorships, the C-suite. So how did you, Q, really obtain C-suite sponsorship to get started? And can you share basically some of the best practices? How did you earn their trust?
Yeah, so we definitely were, as I mentioned, kind of the grassroots. So we started without C-level sponsorship, and it was kind of just, as I said, with the community, kind of, it was a fun startup project. I think fun in the sense of it was kind of like, here's a big problem to solve, but we have no funds to do it. And I love those challenges. So in the beginning, it was just kind of hands and knees and getting people buy-in with like product managers who wanted a problem solved, even though the top managers weren't really interested at the time. So we built a lot of grassroots, so definitely bottom up. Then once we'd kind of, been about a year or two, we'd have a lot of momentum. We started, looking around for bigger opportunities, and we saw that there's definitely holes. Like, saw a big opportunity in marketing, and we ended up doing. I think this is pretty typical selling to executives. So if you're familiar with those approaches, I think a lot of those techniques work well. But basically, you figure out, who's underneath the executive, and then sell to them. So we went and got the strategic person on board, and he just couldn't shut up about it. Like, he loved it. He was just like, we have to do this. This is absolutely something we have to do. And then we actually went and found someone who had a bunch of money they were having trouble spending. I was alluding to that earlier. So we found that, and of course the strategy guy doesn't have any money, so he loves it if you come to him with an idea and you say, I found someone who's got money to spend on it as well. So you kind of create this opportunity, I don't know if the opportunity's there, you solve the problem. And then this executive, we didn't get, I wouldn't say we got full support, like we didn't get the executives sending mails as much as we would have liked, but we had so much support from a couple key people. So the strategy person, person with money, and then a networking person. We got them on board, who all were part of the leadership team. That we got a lot more sponsors on board. So then we got most of the leadership team on board, permission to contact all their employees and promote it and run a campaign like that. So if I know other people, I'm sure, have stories about where they just walk into the executive team and have that relationship. We didn't have that, but definitely building that case with the people who support it, and then going to the executive, and they trust their people. So if all their people are like, yeah, this is something we need to do, then they're just going to be like, fine, let's just do it, or they won't stop it, I should say.
No, it's interesting. Oops, go ahead.
I was going to say, Q, and if it makes you feel any better, I haven't run into a situation yet where like the executive sponsors are like, yeah, come on in, shake stuff up. So almost always we're going in there kind of selling our value and trying to get them to trust us despite their gut of like, this sounds sexy and cool, but is really scary. So I haven't run into one yet who's totally ready to go.
That is exactly it. That sounds cool and sexy, but that's exactly it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We find from our customers that what they typically, as they're getting up and running, feel they need to do is at least get a challenge or two under their belt quickly, and then quickly talk, to the executives about the, outcomes and, frankly, just how many people have engaged about the company, so they at least can start having a story to tell with some results, right? Yeah. And so we typically find they do all they can, and we work very closely with our customers to try to work and help them be able to get a challenge going, pretty quickly, so people start seeing the value and other people get curious and they want to know more in terms of, hey, how'd you do that and how do I get involved? And we've heard also that it's just so important. I think a couple Hangouts have reiterated this too, that it's just so important that the people that do get engaged get thanked and acknowledged that they have engaged, right, so that they keep doing it. And I know those are a couple things that we've heard have helped people be more successful as they've moved forward. So Q, and one more here. I'm just curious a little more on how do you announce the program to the organization when you're first getting started? I commented a little bit about letting people know some results, but what was your announcement look like?
Yeah, and definitely this is I'll refer to one program we ran recently, which was for all of marketing, and it's about 1,300 people. And we did a blog on our social community, and we've had mixed results with those. Sometimes they're just, you get like hundreds of people, and then sometimes you get like 5. And so I would say we did that to start, but it was probably our least effective thing. What was most effective was going down to the sponsoring managers who said, yes, you can reach out to my employees, and asking them that we could contact their employees directly. Most of them let us do that. A few of them said, no, you need to go through our managers and that sort of things. So sending direct, so the executive would send a mail to their whole team saying, this is an important program, you got to do this. Here's a link to the blog that had been posted that wasn't getting a lot of attention. And then we followed up with the employees directly, as well as their direct managers. And so their direct managers mentioned meetings. We actually presented a bunch of those meetings. And then their direct managers sending emails supporting as well. I think in that order, so the exec top for their business area, and then the direct managers, making sure those two endorsed it, was the two most significant things in actually presenting it and getting, and it's more than just kind of saying, hey, we got a program, because I think that's useless. It's like, hey, we got a program, and I need you to take another step. I need you to do something for me, and that's what I think you meant. And if not, that's the absolute most critical thing, and that was the most effective for us. Absolutely.
Okay, no, that's great. That's a great way to get executives involved too, and if they can give direction to everybody in terms of what they need them to do, hopefully you get more and more engagement in the program aspect, so that's great. The other thing I wanted to just ask, I'm going to jump over right now to Courtney, is what would you have done, what would your clients, like what do you hear that they really should have done differently to help speed adoption, if anything?
Well, for us, we recommend, that you treat the launch of your innovation program or the institutionalization of a innovation management capability, treat it like you would innovation itself. It is a rapid, iterative process, right? So think big. Think about what is the larger role that innovation will play in the sustainability of our enterprise, but start small and then learn fast. So just as Kuan and Aisha were talking about, find those pockets of receptivity or openness, those leaders that have that thorny challenge that they just haven't been quite able to crack with the traditional methods. And whether you're leveraging a collaborative innovation program, an idea crowdsourcing campaign, or perhaps you could structure, let's say, an external Shark Tank where employees could be the bettors on who will win, and then those that bet on the winning team can become, work and leverage in bringing that idea to life with that winning Shark Tank team. But so find that pocket of receptivity, because as Aisha and Kuan have well pointed out, and nothing breeds success like success.
Yeah.
So start with that one, learn from it. How do we replicate that, do that better, or is there another mechanism or innovation channel that we could try, which is if we started with collaborative, innovation or idea crowdsourcing, maybe now we should put an innovation scouting program in place where we should start to look at what are the emerging technologies out there and get maybe a small group of, thought leaders who can imagine the art of the possible because this emerging technology exists. What if, and conduct, let's say, what we would call a possibilities workshop. So, think big, but start small and learn fast and just keep growing and extending as you go. So that's one thing for us. And then I'll just reiterate that I think it's absolutely essential, as we talked about. People think, if you're ideating, you must be innovating. Ideation is just one half of the equation. You've got to do something with those ideas. You've got to convert them into value. So whether you build your own, what we like to call rapid iterative experimentation capability, or you procure it, you outsource it, you partner with an enterprise that can help you do rapid prototyping and sort of new venture development to more quickly test the critical hypotheses about ideas, really spend time and having that capability to quickly convert a good idea into a great impactful innovation.
Okay, thanks very much, Courtney. So for the folks who just who have been listening in, I just want you to know we'll do about 5 more minutes of our panel, and then we're going to be taking Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want answered, please be sure to submit them in the questions down below on your panel. We will make sure that we allow time for that. So with that, I also want to remind folks that we are listening in on social. So our Twitter handle is @BrightIdea, #innovation, #leadership, and we would love to hear from you. Okay, so a few more questions. I am going to move on to talk a little bit about the challenges of getting business unit leaders and sponsors on board. And Q, you had talked a little bit about how you went about getting them on board, but what were the challenges that you found?
Yeah, so we definitely didn't get, in many places, there's so many things that have just come up today that highlight why, and I realize, it's like, get that first one out of the way. It's like people, I don't know what the problem is. It's something they're foreign to. They don't know what innovation is, or they've used the word so much, but they had no idea how to actually do it. I think a couple big ones were concerns with similar programs in existence, and I'm just starting to drill down into this. But what I think it is that if there's a similar program, there's probably budget associated with it. So if your program comes in and does a better job, that's probably going to mean that they lose their budget. So that's just something to consider. And as well as, I think the other one is timing. We had our biggest group in one campaign we ran. It was like 2/3 of the audience submitted 1% of the ideas.
Wow.
And we were like, what? And then the manager supported it, and we did all the right things. We had all the communications, everything was perfect. But we had trouble getting a hold and presenting on their team meeting, and we finally did. And the guy who ran the show for the meeting said, we've been completely restructured. We just went through a bunch of kind of downsizing and then smashed a bunch of teams together and restructure our priorities, and we're still trying to figure out our strategy and top things, and it was just a really bad time to do it. So you definitely need a team that's, or a place that's got some operations going on, and there's a time for innovation. Because it's not that they're not innovative people, it was just there's so many other priorities just keeping the lights on. And I think the other one is kind of back to my original one, is a bit about just understanding the benefits and really, really, they say, oh, can you give me an example of how one idea made your team a couple $100 million or something? And it's kind of hard to carve those out. Because even at SAP, we do we sell licenses and you discount, you sell other things, you make deals. So tracking revenue at the final end can be very difficult. So this is kind of a bit of faith that they have to take, and I find that jump can be difficult. I find that trying to sell them, and that's, I think, as Courtney was saying with the pilot, kind of get it done and get it out of the way and just get that trust going. I think that's a critical element in overcoming that.
Okay, no, that's very, very informative, and it's a challenge getting everybody on board, but if you can get enough folks on board, it can be very successful, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Always.
So
Always is.
yeah, really. So we only have another couple minutes, and I want to move to the Q&A. So I'm going to, frankly, go around to each panelist. And Q, and I have you up, so I'm going to have you continue at this stage. What I'd like to hear is what one thing you learned as you progressed that you wish you knew at the beginning, and then follow that with, is there anything you'd do differently? Okay?
The one thing, I think we'd have to do kind of the basics to get started, educate ourselves, and just kind of get the company wet in the taste of innovation and getting familiar with it. But I think the thing we do differently is go target larger opportunities right away, and perhaps even be, saying something about myself, is be a little bolder. I think there's a comment that came out about being a maverick, and I describe that as being comfortable making people uncomfortable. And you're going to step on someone's toes. Everywhere you turn at SAP, you're going to step on someone's toes, and you can't. That can't stop you. You can't please everyone. And yes, a lot of culture is about consensus and getting people collaborate. Well, in the beginning of innovation, it's about not collaborating. It's not a time you need to go off and just try something and give it the room to grow and make mistakes and learn, and then once it's successful, integrate it back in. So you shouldn't ever use the word competitive. People will use that word, but you have to be able to defend that, because if you don't, then you'll never innovate. Everything's going to be competitive with an existing process. That's why you're doing it. You want to get rid of that existing process. So I think it really is kind of stepping back and really looking at the opportunities available in the company, and diving after those first, being more bolder and being more comfortable with making people uncomfortable, and just going after them. I wish I was a lot more aggressive. I wish my team was a lot more aggressive in the beginning, and we're definitely pointing all guns at just throwing crazy stuff out there. Just say, let's just take this whole team and run an innovation program. Who cares about all this stuff? And I'm really surprised at the support we're getting.
What's amazing is you see that people are trying to disrupt and have people feel uncomfortable, but their passion for innovation and what they're doing helps them to win people over, right? So it's an interesting personality, as we talked about, that you need to hire there. So anyway, thank you for that. And Aisha, just to wrap in terms of some of your insights, really, what would you have done differently? Any wrapping words of wisdom here for folks that are just getting started?
Yep, I'm gonna piggyback right on to Kuhn's point and say, when I tell folks who are entering this space, the number one thing that I wish someone had told me was that that while innovation sounds really sexy, it's super disruptive. It makes people very uncomfortable. No matter how enthusiastically they come to you to say, let's do this, they're fibbing because they don't quite understand what it is you're going to come back and ask them to do. So if you know that you're in a place where you're going to cause some virtuous disruption, you have to start getting really, really comfortable with being an anxiety manager. That's the kind of, I think at first, one of the most important roles for somebody who's in the position of evangelizing or pioneering some innovation is your biggest job is going to be to realize what people's anxieties are, pay attention to what they're expressing as their anxieties, and help them individually manage those anxieties away. And that will create the emotional space they need to kind of play, particularly in an innovation space where ideation is just the beginning, right? It's awesome to have a really cool, unique idea. It is really frighteningly scary to ask everyone at work to change everything they're doing to go bring that idea to fruition when you have no proof or way of verifying that it's actually a good idea. Right? So this is where experimentation comes into play. This is where some of the other tools in innovation come into play, but it's all based on this root of understanding that people don't innovate because they get anxiety, and you have to help manage that anxiety away to have even the space to talk about the good ideas that are invariably going to come if you give people a format to give them to you.
Great, thank you. And Courtney, can you briefly give us some tips, some parting words that you would like to share? For folks getting started. One
thing I think a lot about is just maybe using an entirely different word, and that whether not calling it innovation, because innovation there's a spectrum, right, from the incremental to the breakthrough. And organizations are comfortable with incremental innovation. They may not have called it an incremental innovation, but all the daily changes or the small changes that we're making to products and services and processes are indeed new and novel things. That's an innovation, right? So do we call it adaptivation or something else? But it is that we need this process by which we can be more agile in responding to the new threats and opportunities that this exponential world presents organizations. I think the other thing too is that the goal is we're not innovating simply for just to be innovating, right? We are generating new and novel ideas and converting them to value, right? Because we've got some needle to move, right? So we need to ground whatever we're doing, call it adaptivation or innovation or what have you. But it has to be grounded in what is the larger, problem to solve, or for example, look at sort of your highest margin business, which might be an indicator where you might be actually have the greatest disconnect with your customers. Because if you're making a lot of money doing it, that you may very well be mismatched with maybe it's because they've got nowhere else to go, they've got to buy it, but they're highly dissatisfied. That may be where you're at greatest threat when some disruptor comes along. So, what is that we're really trying to do? We want to protect the core for long enough. So we want to prevent disruption or disrupt ourselves first. So we have to think about couching this thing called innovation, or call it what you will, in the context of being a means to the end of solving some larger strategic or maybe highly tactical problem that the enterprise has, that the current way of doing business with, which is our large, our long-tailed new product development life cycle, or our large, transformational program management techniques. It requires a new way of working, a new way of solving these challenges. And we have to think of that. We have to be in a position, we are in a world of increasing uncertainty. And the role of innovation, or the role of innovation management, is to help reduce that uncertainty. It's to help an enterprise rehearse for all the possible futures, because no one has the crystal ball. And I think the crystal ball will become even more elusive. Yeah. So we need this capability to rehearse. What are the possible scenarios? What are all the strategic options or innovative ideas that we can generate to address that possible scenario? Let's rapidly experiment. Let's experiment. Put a minimum viable product together. Put it in the hands of an early stage customer, and talk about dissuading sort of an unfriendly executive. If you have a customer come tell your executive that little MVP you just put in their hands is the greatest thing since sliced bread, I imagine you're going to get a lot more support than you imagine. So I think it's remembering that it's not just innovation for innovation's sake, but it is a new way in which to solve the problems of today, which requires a much more agile, responsive mechanism.
Okay, no, great input. I feel like I should clap after that, Courtney. It was very passionate and really good insights, and I'm sure everyone listening who's in innovation loves to hear the enthusiasm. So
I'm sorry, I'm probably a little loud. I'm a long talker, as they say.
No, that's fine. Listen, we only have a little less than 10 minutes, and I really want to make sure to get to folks' Q&A, because I promised. So I'm going to jump in now on the Q&A, and the folks who feel that this is most pertinent, the panelists, would very much welcome you jumping in. So the first question that we have, and remember folks, you can enter your questions at the bottom, and you can also vote on the ones that you would like to make sure are asked. The first question is, what are the factors that make it difficult to get a company to embrace corporate innovation?
Good question.
Aisha, would you like to jump in?
Oh, sure. That was a good question. I was not just saying that to hedge in there. I think the most important factor is really fundamentally everybody who's sponsoring and understanding that. So let me level set with, usually I work with companies that are, earlier to kind of Courtney's point, are the companies that have really, they're lucrative, they're well established, and they have a whole organization set up around making a change, normalizing the change, supporting the change indefinitely. And that whole operating model is dying. It's not going to be around much longer. So because market demand it basically, customers are demanding we operate a little bit differently than that. So, you know, some of the most important factors for folks to kind of key in on are that the people who run things, the people who, for example, architect your operating model, have to fundamentally understand that something like innovation is going to change the way you operate. If they don't understand that, then when you come back later and kind of insinuate that we have to change the way they operate, they're going to be surprised, and it's going to cause a really high level of anxiety, and it will definitely trip you up. It'll stop the maturity of your practice. So you don't have to get them on board with that immediately, right? You can absolutely go and have your lighthouse project and begin to experiment, but as soon as you see energy coming around the innovation space, you need to go and make sure that, like I said, those folks, whether they're involved in the innovation you're doing or not, are completely aware at what some of the implications are for adopting a continuous cycle of what you just demonstrated in your lighthouse project.
Great. I'm going to move to the next question, just make sure we get to some. How do you make sure everybody's engaged? And Q, and this might be for you based on the discussions, or if someone else would like to bring it up, but really, how do you make sure everybody's engaged to participate beyond their day-to-day jobs? The worry is, you know, people have a hard time thinking, I'm going to make time for this and understanding the value.
So I love these types of questions, actually, because a lot of what we talk about innovation management, you're like, okay, just define a good challenge problem, but like what the H does that mean? And the devil's in the details. And this is a great one. So we've had situations where we've had like manager buy-in, team lead buy-in. We've presented at team leads, and like an employee has come to us and said, I want to submit an idea, but my manager told me I can't. So you need, I mean, there's so many things that need to be aligned, but I think some of the crucial things is that when someone at top says we need more innovation, they actually allow like 10% of the time to be spent on innovation, or something to spend on innovation. And that also means that the performance metric for the employee has to allow this a little bit of breathing room. So if you say you have to meet all your targets and there's no like removal of the work that you have to do, then they're not being motivated to do it. So first, make sure the organizational piece is there, and then really, so that's, I'm just saying, the biggest barrier you could have, or a surprise. Also a good reason to run a pilot, because these things you don't find out when you just ask people. And then the second thing is getting them to become physically engaged. And I mentioned this earlier. It was immensely successful. Is we got in each region, probably about 20 or 30 different areas within SAP. We got a point person to run a 90-minute brainstorm workshop. And the brainstorm workshop was literally read the 5 slides on what the problem statement is. Spend 30 minutes writing down ideas, spend 30 minutes coming together, sharing your ideas, and pick one to submit online. So it like wasn't rocket science. It was just getting them to stop, having like their team lead or someone with some authority or just a colleague in their direct environment to get them to stop, take the time to think about it, and then fill it out. And we actually printed out, or I converted the questions into a Word document and then got the team person to print it out. So they actually wrote down their answers just quickly that were the same questions that they would have to answer when submitting online. And so there was a bit of a gap there to getting them to take the paper and go put it online, but a lot of them did. It was a huge success.
Oh, interesting. So along those lines, what makes programs stall, and how do you prevent the engagement from petering out?
Well, you know, from my perspective, I mean, and it's a point that I made a couple of times, so I don't mean to be repetitive, but it's just that it's kind of the fact. You know, nothing will stop the program faster than if you've reached out to the employees, you've asked them for their ideas, and then nothing happens to them, right? So there's no follow through. So then they've spent some time, they actually participated, and now nothing comes of it. And so I think the first thing is making sure that you have the commitment from whoever the sponsor is from the beginning to the end, that you not only have the funding or the time or the resources focused on the idea generation, but you also have budget, time, and resources, and the right resources, good resources, that actually can take time to do the evaluation, the selection, and then equally and as important as actually start to build that minimum viable product, whether it's a product or service or a reimagined business process or customer experience, and start to test that. Whether maybe you're going to use, you know, your own employees as proxies for customers, or actually with customer, you know, because you want to do it in a safe environment first, but start to get testing. So see something, get sponsorship from the beginning to the end, so that you can, in fact, be able to measure the impact of of that effort. So that's one of the things that I would say should be focused on.
I'd second that, and I'd also say this is a beautiful. If you're going to spend any money like on this program, like this is a beautiful time to bring in some consultants, because the innovation management consultants will hold a schedule, an Excel or something, and make sure that like every day is checked off, because all those things and those resources are absolutely essential to making this successful. If you're like, we'll figure out the implementation when we get there,
yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
You need to start with the end in mind, or one of my favorite expressions, measure twice, count once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. I really want to thank our panelists. I know we're at the top of the hour, but absolutely very good information if you're getting started in your innovation journey and innovation program. We at Bright Idea obviously would love to help you. We've been in the business and have very, very proven methodologies. I know Tata does also, and would very much welcome hearing from you. If you'd like any free content to help you get started, please do visit www.brightidea.com or engage with us on Twitter at Bright Idea. We would love, again, to hear from you. And again, any questions, we welcome hearing from them. And I really do very much want to thank our panelists. This was very engaging, very helpful, and I know in the innovation space we're all very passionate about what we do, so we hope those listening in have enjoyed this. Thank you, Kuan. Thank you very much, Courtney. And thank you, Aisha. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. If other questions come up, feel free to hit us up on social, and we will be sure to answer your questions. Thank you, everyone, very, very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bright Idea. Bye-bye.